We want to get into introducing our first speaker, Nancy Vogel. Shortly after taking office, Governor Gavin Newsom released a strategy to cope with climate change, environmental and ecosystem challenges, and depletion of groundwater resources. It's called the Water Resilience Portfolio, and today we have with us the woman who was appointed by Governor Newsom to carry out that plan. Nancy Vogel joined the Natural Resources Agency as director of the governor's Water Portfolio Program in May 2019. Before her appointment, she was Director of Communications at the Resources Legacy Fund. Nancy previously served in the Brown administration as Deputy Secretary for Communications for the agency and Assistant Director for Communications at the Department of Water Resources. These positions just scratch the surface of her vast professional experience, which includes reporting for the LA Times and Sacramento Bee. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Nancy Vogel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. Really appreciate that. Thanks everybody for being here and giving me some time this morning to bring you up to speed on where we are in the water resilience portfolio. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm a technical idiot, so let's just hope this goes well. I have a PowerPoint. So let's do this. Let me make this full screen. Whoops. Are you seeing it? Okay. Great. All right. So I want to pull you all back very quickly to April 2019. And if you can't hear me well, just let me know. Just feel free to interrupt and if there's any technical problems. April 2019, that was like a lifetime ago. The Governor Newsom issued an executive order calling for the water policy blueprint that he dubbed a water resilience portfolio. And he asked my agency, the Natural Resources Agency, to work with the California Environmental Protection Agency and the California Department of Food and Agriculture to shape how the state could orient its energy and investments towards ensuring that California can address longstanding water challenges and climate uncertainty. The overall aim of the portfolio is essentially shared prosperity for communities, for ecosystems, and for our economy, given the essential nature of water to everything that we care about as Californians. So in the executive order, which went on for a few pages, it was pretty detailed. The governor asked us to inventory and assess the current state of California water and what future demand and climate impacts might look like. He also asked us to inventory all existing state water-related programs, which was no easy task. And he asked that the recommended actions in the portfolio prioritize multiple benefits, natural infrastructure, innovation, regional approaches, successful models, and integration across state government. So I was hired to do the begging, the borrowing, and the stealing of assistance from other sister agencies to get this job done. We invited the public to submit written suggestions about what they thought should be included in a water resilience portfolio. We held public meetings around the state for those who wanted to speak and not write. I met one-on-one with dozens of stakeholders. I got really helpful written input from MODOC and many of your retail water districts. And we released a draft document about a year ago, January 2020, for public review. Big thanks to you all for that substantial input and for your effort in the comment letters. I reread them many times, summarized them so that I could pull out the most salient themes and patterns and points. It was a privilege to get all that feedback, and the portfolio really was preparing it was quite an education, and it reinforced for me how many stubborn inequities and longstanding challenges we have in California water, how much of our natural heritage has been diminished by water development. But it also reinforced for me how much works really well day after day in the face of erratic precipitation and huge imbalances geographically in terms of supply and demand. I'm impressed by the risks and the trade-offs that urban water users and managers like yourselves have to handle every day with high stakes. And I came away hopeful that in some places we can reverse some of the destruction that took place before we truly began to appreciate the ecosystem services like wetlands that filter and floodplains that attenuate flow and soils that hold water and carbon. Now, there is no way that a water resilience portfolio on a state level could please every stakeholder, but I do think that there was widespread support for these themes One, locals by and large manage water, so the state plays a supporting role. Two, the better we understand one another's needs, the easier it will be for us to find solutions than to pay for those. And three, our backbone water infrastructure is aging at the same time that climate change has pretty much ripped up the historical record that we leaned on to understand just how severe things may get. So we had better be prepared for extremes. And I can't emphasize this enough. This portfolio it's a state effort to support local movement towards resilience. It does not include any new local mandates. So after a delay of several months while our leaders dealt with the COVID pandemic, we released the final portfolio in July 2020. It includes 142 actions slotted into 4 major pillars related to supply, environmental protection, integration, and preparation. We added 14 new actions and we deleted 5, and we tried to adjust specific actions that where the feedback from the public there was a strong, well-reasoned criticism. For example, in the draft, we had an action that would have directed water users to provide real-time data about water diversions, and that has been revised to have the State Water Resources Control Board study the costs and benefits of such a requirement. Now, we cannot tackle all 142 actions in the portfolio with equal vigor given our limited resources. When we released the draft portfolio in January 2020, the administration was working towards putting on the November 2020 ballot a $4.75 billion climate resilience bond that would have gone a long way towards funding many of the actions in the portfolio. That didn't happen. Our economy took a downturn related to the pandemic. But we do have some existing funds that will allow us to make progress on many of these actions in the next couple of years. In the state budget, I'm pleased to say that the situation has improved remarkably recently. And I was happy to see that the governor proposed in January in his budget additional funding for sustainable groundwater management grants, for Delta water quality, and for habitat restoration. So we heard again and again from stakeholders, including MODOC, that these actions in the portfolio ought to be prioritized. I'm going to do that for you right now. I'm going to just give you a quick update on a handful of the administration's highest priorities, which I also think will be of keen interest to you. Number one, and I'm sure this is important to MODOC as well, there are about 1 million Californians who lack reliable access to safe drinking water, which is not acceptable. In July 2019, the governor signed the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Act to invest up to $130 million a year for 10 years to correct what he called a moral disgrace. The State Water Resources Control Board is spearheading implementation of this law through its SAFER program, and SAFER stands for Safe Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience. In the first year of SAFER, 20 drinking water systems were returned to compliance, and the program so far has provided interim drinking water supplies to 173 communities and planning and technical assistance to 72 communities. The Water Board right now is in the process of developing a needs assessment, which will identify at-risk systems so that we can also address those preemptively. So the consolidations and the connections that have happened since the 2012-2016 drought will help if we have to endure a third dry year. But aquifers in most places have not recovered, and we should expect problems with dry wells starting this year. And we're going to have to manage what I think is an understandable inclination by some to use the SAFER funding to deal with drinking water emergencies like dry wells, instead of investing methodically to solve long-standing problems. But if we divert this funding, I don't think we'll ever get out of a cycle of emergency response when it comes to drinking water. I'm sure all of you are familiar with SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the package of laws that gave locals responsibility for managing groundwater basins sustainably with the potential for state intervention if they fail. Of the 515 groundwater basins in California, the 21 critically overdrafted basins have submitted their first sustainability plans to the California Department of Water Resources for review. And DWR now has until January 2022 to review those plans, and the 94 high and medium priority basins are in the process of preparing their sustainability plans to be submitted by the state in January 2022. But this action that we included in the portfolio about supporting local implementation calls on us as state bureaucrats, frankly, to step outside of our roles as regulators and to work across agencies to provide technical and other kinds of support to regions that are trying to bring their basins into sustainable conditions. Our team includes GoBiz and the Labor and the Workforce Development Agency. It focuses on helping to facilitate recharge, to support the disadvantaged communities, and to support county planners as they look around the bend at the potential changes that are coming in land use and tax rolls and zoning. We folks have estimated that somewhere between 500,000 and 1,000,000 acres of farmland in the Central Valley could be fallowed over the next 20 years in order to shrink agriculture to a level that allows for sustainable groundwater resources. That could affect tens of thousands of jobs. I think we all need to remember that this effort, however difficult, should bring us sustainable agriculture in California and a recovery of the aquifers that are essentially our savings account for drought. So this has taken up a lot of my time lately, the efforts to negotiate voluntary agreements. Balancing competing uses of water in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, that's no easy task. Susan Tatayon would have a different job in California Water, and there would be no Delta Stewardship Council if this was an easy thing to do. The State Water Resources Control Board is responsible for protecting the many beneficial uses in the Delta through a regulatory regime called a Water Quality Control Plan. The Newsom administration has been working now with water users towards voluntary but enforceable agreements that could meet the Water Board's legal standards while providing more flexibility than straight up regulation for adaptive management. So a year ago, the state released a framework that described in terms of flow and habitat the measures that it considered adequate to meet the Water Board's legal requirements to protect beneficial users in the Delta. That was an important marker. Since then, litigation over endangered species in the Delta has complicated our talks with water users to meet those flow and habitat benchmarks. But Cal EPA and my agency continue to talk with water users, and we continue to make progress towards agreements. We are optimistic that we can find some common ground with the Biden administration that will help us settle some of these differences over Delta water project operations. Kudos to the many different water districts in Southern California that have invested mightily in water recycling. And to support you and your work and your ambitious recycling goals, the state needs to adopt new regulations that would allow cities to skip the step of putting treated wastewater into aquifers or reservoirs to mix with other sources before putting it into your distribution systems. So the Water Board is working towards promulgating regulations that protect public health by 2023. And I believe a blue ribbon expert panel will assemble this summer to help push us towards meeting that 2023 deadline. Especially up in the Sacramento Valley, there's incredible opportunities to give rivers more room to roam and then to capture the ancillary benefits that include reducing peak flows in the river channel, replenishing aquifers, creating habitat, and nourishing soils. Last October, my agency announced that it would direct nearly $50 million in Proposition 68 funding to 15 projects that can immediately help improve ecosystem health for Central Valley salmon, steelhead, and other native fish. And we're hoping in the governor's budget, we're hoping the legislature agrees that another investment of $125 million in those kinds of projects should happen. So water storage. When they passed Proposition 1 in 2014, California voters agreed to spend $2.7 billion paying for the public benefits of new water storage projects. Such benefits could be environmental or related to water quality or flood control or emergency response or recreation. In July 2018, the California Water Commission selected 8 projects, half of them groundwater storage, half of them surface storage, to fund. So the proponents of those projects are now pushing towards achieving certain milestones by January 2022 in terms of feasibility and environmental studies and funding arrangements. And if you've been paying attention to the Water Commission, you know that one of the 8 projects, Temperance Flat, which would have involved, the project it is still potentially viable. It's just that the proponents have withdrawn from the water storage investment program process at the Water Commission. It would have involved another dam on the upper San Joaquin River. But because Temperance Flat was withdrawn from the program, that left $171 million that had been conditionally awarded to that project. So the Water Commission in recent months has weighed what to do with that funding, and they have decided to increase the conditional award to 2 projects that back in 2018 were not given all that they had requested, and that's the Kern Fan groundwater project and the Willow Springs Water Bank, both of them in Kern County. The commission then also gave a 2.5% inflationary bump to all the 7 projects. And then they put out a call with the $64 million that's left. They put out a call to solicit any potential new storage projects that could be able to meet the regulatory deadline under the Prop 1 funding and the regulatory guidelines. We very much want these projects to succeed, and state agencies are working with the project proponents to calculate what the public benefits are and to contract for those potential public benefits. I'm sure folks in Orange County are quite familiar with the Delta Conveyance project that the California Department of Water Resources is spearheading. Over 5 weeks last fall in separate votes, the boards of 18 public water agencies agreed unanimously to fund a total of $107 million for continued planning and permitting of Delta Conveyance over the next 2 years. So now DWR is working on environmental review documents and consulting early with federal fish agencies and the Delta Stewardship Council on permitting for the project. This spring, DWR also is going to be reaching out to folks in the Delta to develop a community benefits program for the project. The purpose of the community benefits program would go beyond traditional concepts of mitigation. And it's an effort to demonstrate goodwill and to address potential adverse effects that communities may endure through construction of a major project like this. Down in Imperial and Riverside counties at the Salton Sea, our state team continues to make progress in a key step to improve conditions at this shrinking lake. Construction began in January on the state's first large-scale project to create habitat and reduce exposed lake bed. The Species Conservation Habitat Project is located at the southern end of the sea. It's on both sides of the New River, and it will create a network of ponds and wetlands to provide important fish and bird habitat and suppress dust emissions to improve regional air quality. It'll cover about 4,000 acres. And we're also establishing a new Salton Sea Management Program office in Imperial County so we can expand our capacity and increase our community outreach. This is also taking a lot of my time, and it's good work. This is a huge priority. This is an issue of environmental justice and tribal reconciliation. We've made terrific progress since July. California, Oregon, and the Yurok and the Karuk tribes are working together with PacifiCorp, which owns 4 dams on the Klamath River, to remove those dams. They provide little to no flood control or water supply benefits, marginal hydroelectricity, but they do block more than 300 miles of really terrific salmon spawning habitat on California's second largest river. It's through a complex process at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're working to transfer ownership of the dams to a nonprofit entity for the purpose of tearing them down. And the governor personally weighed in on this project last fall when he sent a letter to Warren Buffett, whose company owns PacifiCorp, the Portland utility that owns the dams. And the governor urged Mr. Buffett to expedite dam removal, and that has helped. Funds from Oregon ratepayers and a voter-approved bond in California already have been earmarked for the project, and now we just have to keep the many pieces of this project moving forward on time and in coordination. And that includes actions at public utility commissions in 7 different Western states where PacifiCorp operates. But as our Department of Fish and Wildlife Director says, failure is not an option. So where are we in terms of progress on the portfolio actions? Each of the actions in the portfolio have been assigned to various departments or teams of departments, and we're making progress on most of them. There's about 17 where we haven't yet begun to make progress. On many of them, we're not making as much progress as we'd like, but we are tracking each and we're seizing opportunities as they present themselves. We will make as much progress as we can given resources, and our top priority, of course, is working with local agencies and communities to get safe drinking water to all those who lack it. Many of the actions in the portfolio are complex, and they're going to unfold in ways that we cannot fully appreciate right now. This kind of work is gradual. It unfolds over time. It takes many relatively small incremental actions to create big change, and it's not going to happen instantly. And please don't forget that the portfolio is about positioning the state to better support local movement towards water resilience. It's going to take all of us working together to achieve the goals of the portfolio. So I look to MODOC and its member agencies to help us carry out some of these specific actions, and I hope that in your own work you can embody the principles and the collaborative nature of the portfolio. I urge you to dig into your own strategic plans and your capital investment plans and see how they tie to the principles of the portfolio. And I will stop talking now and turn it back over to Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That was a jam-packed presentation with a lot of great information. And with that, I want to open it up for questions. I don't see any hands raised at the moment. I do see a question in the chat. So let me see if I can expand my window a little bit. So it's a pretty lengthy question. Jana, do you want to unmute and share your question verbally? So her question is, with regard to the existing aquifer in the Brea Olinda oil fields, where hundreds of oil and gas wells, both active and abandoned, currently being worked 24/7 and unfortunately exempt from the CEQA rules, what is being done to ensure the safety and protection of the water within the aquifers?
That is a question for the State Water Resources Control Board that I'm not prepared to answer at this moment, but if someone can email that question to me, I can make sure that I get back to the asker of the question.
Great. And then Ellen asked if we can have access to the slides. Just as a reminder that this presentation is being recorded, and I'm sure Nancy would be more than happy to share her slides as well. So we will post that as well with the link. Great. Any other questions? Please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom if you'd like to ask a question. There's a hand raise function. I will also scan cameras to see if I see any hands raised, or you can always unmute and ask a question.
I don't see the hand raised function.
So
we have a question from Robert Simmons in the chat. Robert, would you like to unmute yourself? Go ahead.
I was just, I've heard that we lose a lot of water between the providers and the end users through leakage and old infrastructure. Can you comment on how much we could diminish our crisis by facing that issue?
So I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but there was a package of laws that were enacted, and I'm trying to remember, it was 2016 or 2018, I believe. No, probably 2016. Right after the drought, and we call them the conservation as a way of life laws. There were a couple of laws that will essentially get us to the point where we have new indoor and outdoor urban water efficiency standards. And the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board are working to implement those pretty complicated laws. One part of those laws is focused on leaks and trying to assess exactly what you're asking, and also to help position water districts to do a better job of leak detection. And I would have to go back and take a look at where DWR stands in terms of its quantification of leaks and the progress as we implement those laws. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for you, but I know that we've got folks working on it.
Thank you so much. We also have a hand raised
Thank
from
you.
President Tamara Bucci.
Thank you, Nancy. Very, very informative presentation. I was wondering what you understand to be the primary obstacles to achieving the voluntary agreements, and what we need to do to get beyond those obstacles.
Well, that's a good question. And as I mentioned, the sharing of the water resources in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta are fraught. It's never easy. And the litigation, there were a couple lawsuits filed that had to do during the Trump administration with biological opinions that were issued by the Trump administration that had to do with protection of endangered species and pumping rules for the water projects in the Delta. And then the state sued over those Trump era endangered species rules. And then the state on its own issued an incidental take permit under the California Endangered Species Act that has now is being litigated by water users, by the federal and state water project contractors. So I think to answer your question, the most immediate hurdle is the litigation. And with the Biden administration, we're hopeful that with new appointees to Interior and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, we can begin to resolve that litigation, come to agreement on Delta pumping rules, and that is a stepping stone toward reaching voluntary agreements over flow and habitat. I guess at the most basic level, the reason it's difficult to reach voluntary agreements is that water users don't want to give up water, and that they don't feel is going that they, unless they can see evidence that it's going to help the species and the science, and Susan Tatayon can talk about this. Science in the Delta is always difficult and never clear cut, rarely clear cut, I should say. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. And we have another hand raised from Carol Moore from Laguna Woods.
I did ask if you could expand a little bit on the mitigation at the Salton Sea. Thank you.
Well, what in particular, Carol?
How you're handling the preventing the wind. You saw the girl in there with the aid to breathing, and how you're handling that, the soil blowing.
Right. So as the lake shrinks, it exposes lake bed, and particles get picked up that are a real public health hazard. So the state is, besides the one project that I mentioned that we broke ground on recently, we've got other projects in the planning stage, and we've completed a dust suppression action plan, and we're working with federal, state, and local partners to implement the projects that are mentioned in that plan. We're focusing on those areas that have the greatest potential for that. I can't say this word, I always bungle it. The greatest potential for emissions. I'll put it that way. I don't work in the air pollution world. And so that's where we're focusing our attention. So there will be more projects to come.
So I want to make sure we get through some of the chat questions as well as the hands raised. So we'll go to Director Swan and then we'll go to some of the chat questions because I think Director Gibson also has his question in the chat. So we'll go with Director Swan.
Hey, thank you very much, Nancy. Pierre Swan, Irvine Ranch Water. Seems like your plate has a lot of room for more stuff to be heaped on. Tongue in cheek here, but is the state, really ready to and believe that's essential to essentially, fallow about 1 million acres of farmland in the Central Valley in order to maintain the sigma balance? And have they looked at improving some of the conveyance around the state so we might be able to bring water that is above and beyond the requirements into that area to reduce the amount of farmland that might be forced to fallow? Thank you.
I'm glad you asked about conveyance. I think it's worth noting that in the last few months, the Water Commission has been sponsoring public workshops and panels of experts to discuss what could a state role potentially be in terms of financing new or improved conveyance. And that was one of the actions in the portfolio. We tasked the Water Commission with doing that, and we're working towards a white paper later in the spring, perhaps by June, to look at financing, a potential state role in financing conveyance, all of which is tied to recharge, as you mentioned. But Pierre, I want to challenge your premise a bit. It's Sigma implementation. The responsibility lies first with local agencies, and they will be the folks that will have to take a look at their challenges and their assets and decide, is it water trading? Is it recharge? Is it conservation? Is it fallowing that we need to turn to bring our basin into sustainable conditions over time?
I understand that, but the state had, through the regulatory agencies, have put additional requirements that make it improbable or more difficult to get any water, to better balance those, especially in the San Joaquin. And so, yes, it is a local responsibility, but a lot of people, including me, don't believe the state is helping. It's a one-way deal. You fix it and I'll make it more difficult, it seems.
Okay, I hear you. So one of the slides I showed you had to do with supporting local implementation of Sigma, and I mentioned that we have interagency teams at the state level working on different issues. One of those is to facilitate recharge, and we are having pretty important conversations between the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board about the watershed scale climate analyses that the Department of Water Resources is doing in some areas, which I think could be incredibly valuable for local water districts in terms of the data that they make available. And it's all related to recharge ties everything together. Everything connects to recharge, whether it's, conveyance and water rights and downstream users and protection of the ecosystem, et cetera. So when you touch recharge, it gets complicated fast. So we are having important conversations, looking at the work that DWR is doing on a watershed scale, looking at what the State Water Resources Control Board, which has a division of water rights, what the folks there need whenever a district comes to them and applies for a right to flood flows in order to recharge aquifers. And we're trying to figure out if there's a way to get a consistent methodology, consistent data that would help ease the burden on locals as they make those applications for water right, for water that may be available in the wet years. So I hear you, it's difficult, be patient, we're working on it.
I think that's a great segue to Director Gibson's question from Santa Margarita Water District. How does administration plan to coordinate among interrelated priorities? What additional actions will the administration take to coordinate with the federal administration?
Well, we are having great conversations with the appointees that we've got so far in the water world in the Biden administration, and we will continue to have those conversations. One of the main themes of the portfolio was interagency coordination at the state level. In other words, we need to get our act together. And I think the portfolio has helped to drive a lot of coordination, a lot of relationship building that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And that to me is the most exciting part of the portfolio, seeing connections being made across agencies. And I know that sounds really not very exciting to the rest of the world, but good things come of it. And that's how I think we begin to make bigger improvements down the road. I've become kind of a zealot about the interagency coordination, and I've become a real pain to my colleagues.
Did you want to add anything else to your question, Director Gibson?
Yes, first I want to thank Nancy Vogel. You know, you're not only brave, but it's easy to criticize things, and I recognize how hard it is to achieve what you're trying to do, and I want to just thank you. But also, I think my observation is from the previous administration, Governor Newsom has an opportunity to strengthen his presence in Washington, should he want to do that. And I know that Senator Feinstein has asked him to take a leadership role in resolving many of these interrelated issues. And I'm wondering if, you know, maybe strengthening presence in Washington is part of, you know, the plan of the governor.
I can't speak for the whole administration on that, but I know at the Natural Resources Agency, we've got a new Deputy Secretary for External Affairs who's just working long days and weekends on building those relationships with Congress, with our congressional delegation and the Biden administration.
So just encouraging that, and if I may follow on with one question also for you to think about, not necessarily you to answer for the whole administration, but we in our district and many other districts and even the Metropolitan Water District is investing large amounts of money in infrastructure for recycled water, ground recharge, storage, conjunctive use. Now, most of this is really paid for by our local ratepayers, and they're long-term bonds. What do you think you could perhaps pass along a concern that as we go out for these bonds, we're concerned with changes in regulations that might restrict what we're building, so that we plan to build something with a certain output in a market, but we can't use it because of subsequent regulations that don't consider that. Am I being clear on that?
Yeah, that's a hypothetical unless you have a real example. And I wish I had a colleague with me here from the State Water Resources Control Board to help address that.
Okay, that's fair. We can talk later if you're open to it.
Yes.
In terms of collaborating with the federal administration, we have another question along that line. What can you folks in Biden's administration or the Bureau of Reclamation do to speed up the voluntary agreements? Do we know who are getting the positions yet?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of what you said, Megan?
So there's a question from Katie Wagner, and she was asking, what can you folks in Biden's administration or the Bureau of Reclamation do to speed up the voluntary agreements? And do we know who is getting the positions?
I just didn't hear the, do we know who's getting what?
The positions in the Bureau of Reclamation.
Oh, you'd have to check with the Biden administration on that. We have ongoing, regular, and collaborative conversations with our partners in California and DC at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation.
So we have a few more questions in the chat, but before I get to that, I wanted to just ask Director Tamarabuchi if your hand was up for another question or if it was for the previous question. And then
Megan, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
So I was just wondering if your hand was up for another question or if that was for the previous question.
Oh,
you put out.
I failed to pull it down.
Great, just wanted to confirm. And then we also have a hand up from Director McVicker.
Oh, thank you. Excellent presentation. And there are so many challenges before us. One of the huge ones, though, I think is, the San Joaquin Valley and agriculture and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And one of the recent presentations I saw, they have this blueprint that they're working on. And I was wondering if you could speak to how, the state is interacting with that and supporting that effort.
Yeah, we're familiar with the San Joaquin Valley Blueprint, and then also a related effort that kind of was spun off out of the Blueprint effort, the San Joaquin Valley Collaborative, I believe it is called. And so the Blueprint effort is focused on projects. What can be done? What interties do we need? What conveyance do we need in order to bolster recharge in the San Joaquin Valley? And then the collaborative is focused on trying to bring everyone to the table, all interests in the San Joaquin Valley, to get a regional, an agreement on what the challenges are and a path forward. And some regions, some watersheds did that 20 years ago, but in the San Joaquin Valley, that's kind of a new effort, and we're supportive at the state level of those kinds of conversations and those efforts.
Great, thank you. So we have quite a few other questions that are continuing to come in. What I'll do is I'll track them for the very end. We also have an additional Q&A period where you can ask questions of both Susan and Nancy. And if there are common themes, I will try to arrange them in that manner as well. But with that being said, I'd like to launch our second poll. We have a brief poll that should pop up on your screen. And the question is, which Delta island flooded due to a locomotive? So it looks like we're getting quite a few responses coming in. We'll wait about 30 more seconds. We have about a third of people responding. So it looks like it's getting pretty close. Drum roll. The correct answer is the Upper Jones Tract, which has just slightly more poll results than the Lower Roberts Island. So certainly everyone here and throughout the state has a vested interest in the Bay Delta. For 50 years, we have been striving to come up with a sustainable solution to not only shore up deliveries from the north through the Delta, but also to protect the environment and the ecosystem that grows more fragile each day. Which brings us to our next speaker. Susan Tatayon, chair of the Delta Stewardship Council, was appointed by Governor Brown in 2014 and reappointed in 2018. The council elected Susan to serve as vice chair in 2016 and as full-time chair effective January 2019. In a career spanning more than 35 years in water resources management, she has worked for the Nature Conservancy, a multinational water resources consulting firm, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and the California Department of Water Resources. She has worked closely with scientists, modelers, and water project operators, so she understands on-the-ground implications of proposed policies. She is working to move the state towards co-equal ecosystem protection and water system reliability goals. And I wanted to add, one of the things that I can really relate to Susan is her desire to connect science with policy. And so we're really excited to have her with us today. Susan, thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you, Megan. I am very grateful for this opportunity to visit with our Southern California stakeholders this morning, albeit virtually. It's been quite a while since I last had a chance to visit with you all. Let's see, the last time was our council meeting in Southern California on September 26, 2019. And at that meeting, I learned a tremendous amount about the investments and water projects that were being carried out at that time. So what I'll do this morning is give you a very general overview of the Delta. Let me pull up the slideshow and I'll share my screen with you all. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. So this morning, I'll talk about the Delta's significance to California and some major policy decisions that shape the Delta. And I'll also talk about the challenges facing the Delta and its governance and the role of the Delta Stewardship Council. So, where is the Delta? As you can see from this aerial view of the region, the Delta is formed by the confluence of two major rivers, the Sacramento and San Joaquin. The Delta has a diverse landscape characterized by an expansive network of waterways. Though the land use is primarily agricultural, it also includes many industrial uses and cities and towns of various sizes. What is the Delta? It's many things to many people. It's home to 750 plant and animal species. It's the largest estuary on the west coast of North and South America. The rivers, streams, sloughs, and waterways of the Delta are popular for fishing, boating, bird watching, and other recreational activities. And the Delta is now a national heritage area. Californians rely on the Delta. Water from the Delta provides a portion of the water supply for more than 2/3 of Californians and about 3 million acres of farmland. If you're wondering what a national heritage area is, in March 2019, the Congress designated the Delta a national heritage area, which means it's a place of natural, cultural, and historic resources that form a cohesive, naturally important landscape. The legacy communities in the Delta are recognized also in state law. Each is unique and has a rich history, and the Delta Stewardship Council works closely with the Delta Protection Commission, the Delta Conservancy, and others to document and preserve the legacy of these communities. So what has changed in the Delta through the centuries since the 1800s? Prior to the 20th century, the Delta was a vibrant ecological region home to a variety of habitats and thriving populations of native species. Modern development and settlement of the Delta drastically reduced its biological diversity. The earliest large-scale changes to the Delta took place in the 1850s when the federal government incentivized people to reclaim or drain Delta lands for agricultural use, eliminating the largest wetlands of the Pacific Coast Flyway. Because of these incentives and other concurrent factors, such as those associated with California's gold rush, much of the landscape was reshaped through the construction of levees, converting seasonally inundated marshland into highly productive farmland. As you can see from the map on the right, today the farming remains the primary use of land in the Delta and is a major aspect of Delta culture. Early settlers in California relied on local surface water and groundwater resources, and as the state's population grew, so did the demand for water. This slide highlights major policy decisions embodied in water development projects that draw or move water from the Delta and its tributaries to support California's population and the 5th largest economy in the world. California has built an elaborate interconnected storage and conveyance system to distribute water to population centers, meet agricultural demand, and even out extreme wet and dry periods. And the Delta is the hub of this system. So how is water moved across the Delta? Releases of water stored in Central Valley Project and State Water Project reservoirs flow to the Delta, where massive pumping plants pull water south across the Delta, resulting in reverse flows of segments of the San Joaquin River, namely Old and Middle River. The Delta is a tidally influenced estuary. Water releases from the reservoirs are needed to repel intruding seawater. These systems help the state manage the daily push and pull of the tides. And this process will become more complicated in the future decades when rising sea levels come upon the Delta. Once a brackish water estuary, the Delta is now an intensely managed freshwater system year-round. The Delta faces numerous risks and threats. The Delta's native fish are in severe decline due to many factors: pollution, lack of habitat, reverse water flows, and increasing temperatures. And as fish populations decrease dramatically, water supplies face increasing restrictions from enforcement of environmental protection laws that restrict water exports from the Delta and make timing of deliveries unreliable. People live and farm in the Delta. Its islands are protected by earthen levees and dikes that face increasing pressure from rising sea levels and other risk factors, such as seismic risk. And farming practices on Delta islands can cause peat soils to slowly oxidize or subside, leading to land subsidence. Other problems include increases in invasive non-native species and urban runoff. So these challenges, among others, including many agencies with many different visions, working in the Delta, all with their own objectives, make managing the Delta intricately complex and nuanced. And that's where the Delta Stewardship Council comes in. The legislature and Governor Schwarzenegger came together in 2008 and 2009 to act on a comprehensive governance approach to address conservancy, to focus on the Delta, and, to address these challenges. They created an independent state council, a new conservancy to focus on the Delta, and reformulated the existing Delta Protection Commission. They also established new state policy for the Delta, including the co-equal goals and reduced reliance on the Delta. And the Delta Reform Act also calls for application of best available science and a type of structured decision-making called adaptive management for Delta projects. The Council's role is to set a long-term vision for the Delta that will achieve the co-equal goals by developing a legally enforceable overarching Delta plan, make progress toward these goals through a mix of coordination and regulation, and inform decision-making with best available independent science. We have 7 members on the council and about a 65-person staff. The staff of our well-respected science program synthesize and communicate best available science to decision makers. So what is the Delta Plan? The plan is a comprehensive plan. It includes recommendations, regulations, and performance metrics, and establishes a comprehensive approach to furthering the co-equal goals. It calls for reduced reliance on the Delta through more efficient use of water and a focus on developing local water supplies, including recycled water, local storage projects, and sustainable groundwater use, among other actions. The plan also outlines improvements to emergency planning and response, and establishes a regime for strategic investments in Delta levees. It includes strategies to protect and enhance local communities and economies in the Delta. We are currently developing a set of strategies for restoration of large areas of habitat as called for by the Delta Reform Act to aid in recovery of native species. And the plan includes a set of recommendations for improvements to the state storage and movement of water across the Delta to further the co-equal goals. It requires improved reliance on science for decision-making to reduce controversy and improve project outcomes in the face of uncertainty. And all of this is done in coordination with what we call the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. To elaborate on that, I'll show you some of the agencies that we work with. The council is just one player in the Delta scene. Delta governance is quite complex. This slide shows some, but not all, of the state and federal agencies engaged in Delta planning and management. Each of these agencies, with their logos shown here, play some role in managing an aspect of the Delta, and each has a seat on our Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, which is devoted to advancing implementation of the Delta Plan. So essentially, the council's role is to create a long-term, big picture vision for the Delta by setting goals and evaluating progress. And the council is already changing the way projects are done in the Delta fundamentally through the implementation of our plan and influential science program. I mentioned earlier that our plan is legally enforceable. It includes regulations with which Delta projects must demonstrate consistency before moving forward to implement or construct the project. The Delta Reform Act also established an appeals process to challenge projects inconsistent with the co-equal goals. On the science front, we have advanced light years in identifying, organizing, and funding science priorities, and have improved how we use science more effectively in Delta decision-making. But there is still much more to be done. Our science program also promotes and performs peer review on highly controversial topics, such as objectives for flows in the Delta, and provides a unique public venue for key decisions. We've amended the Delta Plan several times since 2013, and currently we're in the amendment process to address changes needed to our ecosystem chapter, with chapter 4, which is titled Protect, Restore, and Enhance the Delta Ecosystem. So chapter 4 was originally developed based on the expectation that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan would be incorporated into the Delta Plan. In May 2015, state and federal agencies shifted their approach from the BDCP to a more focused set of mitigation projects. To address this fundamental shift, the Council in 2016 began developing an approach to update Chapter 4. And we're still in that process. The draft amendment to Chapter 4 includes 5 core strategies that form the basis for the revisions to several policies and recommendations. And as you see, the core strategies here are to create more natural functional flows, restore ecosystem function, which led to a new policy in this chapter, protect land for restoration and safeguard against land loss, protect native species, reduce the impact of non-native invasive species, improve institutional coordination to support implementation of the Delta Plan. So based on public comments on our initial draft, the council staff revised a November 2019 preliminary draft. Those revisions are embodied in the May 2020 draft, which incorporates extensive feedback from the council, Delta stakeholders, the Delta Independent Science Board, other scientific peer reviewers, and the public. And we plan on completing a draft of EIR, Environmental Impact Report, for this amendment by late summer this year. So moving forward, I'll say where you stand on the future of the Delta, what it should or will be, depends largely on where you sit, and more specifically on where your water supply comes from. The Council's independent lens and its long management horizon give it the ability to lead and facilitate discussions about key management strategies for the Delta. And moving forward, the Council will continue to use science and encourage best available science to increase the likelihood of success. We'll strive for landscape scale restoration and planning, continue to encourage reduced reliance on the Delta through our reduced reliance policy, and follow and practice and encourage the portfolio approach to water management in California. So I want to thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for me today.
Thank you so much, Susan. And we've already started getting a few questions coming in through the chat. I'll start with Director Gibson from Santa Margarita Water District. He had a question whether the Delta Plan considers the importance of the Colorado River supply and how the water available through the Delta, together with the Colorado River flows and the salinity impact overall water supply and quality of the water to the state. So overall reliance on either source of imported supply is a problem and must consider balance.
Well, to get right to the question of Colorado River water, the Delta Plan does not specifically account for or call out Colorado River supply.
Great. I think that's more of a local planning issue and a little bit out of the scope of the Delta Plan. In terms of Director Netterhood's question, given the sea level rise, how do you see the Delta being protected from the saltwater invasion over the next 20 or 30 years?
Good question. So we have currently a Delta Adapts initiative, and that initiative has two phases. It includes a vulnerability assessment and an adaptation strategy. So thus far, we have completed the first ever vulnerability assessment for the Delta, and it does indicate that water supply will be affected, of course, by sea level rise. I won't go into the details of the vulnerability assessment. It's forming the basis for our next phase, which we are starting up the adaptation strategy. And I'm anticipating that the adaptation strategy will examine exactly what the question is getting at, is given sea level rise, given these vulnerabilities in this vulnerability assessment, how can we adapt to these climate stressors? So sorry, I don't have an answer to the question at this moment.
Thank you, Susan. We also have a hand up from Director Swan from Irvine Ranch Water District.
Yes, thank you very much, Susan. Many of us in Orange County participated in the various Delta Blue Ribbon, all the Delta Stewardship. We had Monica Florian was on the original panel. Keith Coolidge used to work for MODOC, went up, was loaned by MODOC up to the Delta Blue Ribbon Commission, and then later on to the stewardship. And Phil Eisenberg did a lot of work down here. He was the original chairman. So many of us are very familiar with the whole process here. I keep going back to the changing definition of what reduced reliance means. When it was originally done, and this is straight from Phil Eisenberg's mouth, it meant that in the future, we could not rely on the Delta for additional supplies. Now, it seems that that has morphed, that the then current demands on the Delta must be reduced. And that's quite different. So the co-equal goal of reliable water supply has been perverted by the changing definition of reduced reliance. Could I get your comments on what you believe reduced reliance means? Thank you.
Sure, yeah, so the reduced reliance policy in the Delta plan is intended to reduce reliance in the future here. It's not intended to reduce current exports from the Delta. It's more focused on regional self-reliance. And in fact, in the water resilience portfolio, which I have to say, I have to let everybody know that Nancy Vogel did just an incredible job working with all the many agencies to produce the water resilience portfolio in record time. And in the portfolio, there are a few actions, but one of the actions, I can't remember if it's 18.3 or action 18.4, it does talk about establishing an element in the urban and ag water management plans that would allow the state to take a good hard look at existing reliance on the Delta and how regional agencies are in fact reducing reliance according to the urban water management plan that they submit to the Department of Water Resources.
Great. We also have a few other questions when it comes to reduced reliance. I believe you can answer the one from Director Olson. She's asking, when you refer to reduced reliance on the Delta, are there any specific regional areas that you're referring to? And Director Olson, if you want to clarify your question, you're also welcome to come off mute.
Yes, what I'm interested in what areas, so in what regions, a lot of different areas depend on water from the Delta. And so what areas are you looking at in terms of these reduced reliance? Everyone is trying to develop independent water portfolios.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And also if you could clarify the time horizon for this.
Well, I should back up and specify that the Delta Reform Act set forth this concept of reduced reliance, regional self-reliance. And the expectation is that those folks importing or receiving Delta water supplies are subject to this state policy. So the answer to your question is essentially all areas receiving water from the Delta. However, the Delta Plan is enforced through regulatory policies, and those policies are invoked through the covered action process. And so in this covered action process, an entity that proposes a project in the legal Delta is the entity that must demonstrate that they meet the policies in the Delta Plan, one of them being the reduced reliance. So for example, if I want to do a habitat restoration project in the Delta or a water supply project, there are certain policies that my project will touch in the Delta Plan. And I submit my consistency determination. I certify that my project is consistent with the Delta Plan. And if no one appeals my consistency declaration, my project goes forward. I go immediately to implementation. If someone appeals, the appellant must demonstrate with evidence why my project is not consistent with the Delta plan. And that whole appeal process takes a lot of time and resources. And of course, the Stewardship Council holds the hearings for that appeal process. So that's when all of our policies are enforced. It's through the covered action process. And I hope that answers your question.
I think Betty's on mute.
Thank you. And it did, and clarified. It's complicated, huh? I think.
Yeah. Yes.
So Susan, the other question we have in regards to reduce reliance on the Delta does include the Delta Conveyance Project. So please let me know if this question is outside of what you're able to answer today. But how does a reduced reliance on the Delta coexist with the Delta Conveyance Project?
Yeah, I can't really address the Delta Conveyance Project. I'm under an ethical wall that I just can't discuss the Delta Conveyance Project.
Completely understand, and thank you for clarifying that. We do have time now for, this is a great transition into open Q&A for both Nancy and Susan. And we have a number of questions that we didn't get to previously. So Director Gibson would like to ask from a resilience perspective, because he says that the Delta source in terms of supply must be viewed together with the Colorado River supply, as well as other local and regional projects. To the extent that we develop local supply and conserve, then the Delta supply reliance can be reduced, but there is a limit. So we can only count on the Colorado for a limited supply, and the State Water Project at some point must supply some, and on a yet to be specified baseload. Sorry, I'm trying to translate Chuck's question. Chuck, if you want to clarify or ask any further questions based on what I just read.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to state it concisely, but what keeps happening is, the study of the Delta is bifurcated among so many organizations, and they can't talk to one another. So that's almost self-defeating, as part of what's underlying this question, because locally, when we do projects locally, we get credit for reducing our reliance on the Colorado River, hence, or the State Water Project, to the extent we're getting State Water Project. So there's a connection. And, I just wanted to know what your thoughts are. I know what my thoughts are about it, but how do we achieve this connectivity and work together for the common interest to improve the Delta to everybody's benefit and assure a basic supply from the Delta?
I'll start, or Nancy, do you want to start?
Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to let everybody know that Susan was a huge player in the development of the water resilience portfolio, with us for countless meetings and many hours of work, and I really appreciate her effort. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, this is a tough question, and I know that Southern California and MODOC and that all of you are doing great work on integrated regional water management plans. Yeah, I really admire the Santa Ana River watershed, the habitat conservation plan. And so in my mind, the interagency coordination that Nancy referred to is how we get to acknowledging that the entire state is one big interconnected system. And part of the water resilience portfolio, my thoughts are that the Delta plan and the water resilience portfolio are in line with each other and complementary to each other. The water resilience portfolio also is, of course, striving for regional self-reliance. And if you take a look at the Appendix 3, it has write-ups, excellent write-ups and charts, fabulous information about the status of integrated water management and water supply and demand in the 10 hydrologic regions. And it also has a great section on the Delta, much more detail on the Delta stressors and issues than I gave in my presentation. And so I have to acknowledge that that Southern California is unlikely to not import water from either the Delta or the Colorado River. And from my visit, the council's visit in 2019, I could see that from the innovation and the investments and the tremendous commitment to water conservation and reuse and the inventive ways that Southern California is carrying out, reduce reliance on imports. But I don't have a ready answer. I don't have the master water balance and master integrated regional water management plan for the state of California that accounts for actually reducing specific amounts on Colorado River and Delta supplies. But I'm confident that we have the tools to get there. I have to say I'm all about ecosystem-based water management, which essentially makes clear the ecosystem objectives for each catchment or basin. And I think that Santa Ana River Habitat Conservation Plan is a good example of ecosystem-based management. And so ecosystem-based management combined with integrated water management, I think, gives me hope for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for a few more questions. I'm going to try to wrap them up into a few questions. So we have several questions related to direct potable reuse. And I think, Nancy, in your presentation, you did reference that new regulations would be coming out in 2023. And so one of the questions is that change will dramatically change the financial viability of direct potable reuse projects in dense urban areas like the LA Basin. This person's question is, why should we be making decisions on MODOC sustainability issues before the regulations affecting us are enacted?
I'm sorry, but I didn't quite grasp. I had trouble hearing you, and I'm not in a position to answer that question.
Okay, we will grant, if you want to ask your question in a different venue, we can be sure to try.
Yeah, or if the person asking the question wants to elaborate, I think it's getting at how risky it is for local water districts to make big investments based on the assumption that the state will promulgate regulations. Is that correct?
I believe that's their question. I can try to add a little bit of context. It's my understanding that the state has been quite transparent in the process leading up to these regulations, so I don't anticipate that there will be any major surprises. But okay. I believe that's kind of where they're getting at. Grant, if you want to specify, that works too.
I can't emphasize enough how important the direct potable reuse regulations are as a priority for the Newsom administration. Both the Secretary of Cal EPA and the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency visited Southern California together last year and came away impressed by the recycling projects in place and the ambition of water districts to recycle more, and they understand how crucial the state regulations are to making that happen.
Great, thank you. This should be an easier question. You mentioned that clean and safe drinking water was an issue. Is affordable water on your docket as well?
Yes, and COVID has really put that front and center. I just You folks may be familiar with the State Water Resources Control Board did a survey recently to find out financially how local water districts are faring, given the fact that there's a state policy that says you've got to continue supplying water to customers even when they are not paying their bills. And it was daunting. The results of that survey showed that there's about 1.7 million residential water customers, or 12% of all households, that are not able to pay their bills during the pandemic. And there's up to 25 small and medium-sized water systems that are extreme risk and may need financial assistance soon. And that overall, the total utility customer debt related to water is estimated at $600 million. So Congress approved about $638 million, $638 million in assistance in December. California, Aqua tells me, should get about 60 to 70 million of that, but we really hope for a second larger tranche of funding to assist with that. And that's in the short term on affordability issues.
Great. We have two questions. They're a little bit more specific in scope, so we can, if you'd like to follow up later, that works as well. One is on the Klamath River. How will that dam removal help the salmon in terms of anticipated enhanced salmon population?
We don't have enough time for me to answer that question the way I'd like to, but there's two big ways. One's passage. Right now, the salmon simply can't get past these 4 dams to reach, 300 miles of what potentially could be great spawning habitat, where they used to go before the dams were built in the early 1900s. Second, the dams slow the river down. The river becomes stagnant. Algae blooms. There's a horrific water quality problem that happens on the Klamath River as a result of the reservoirs. And what ends up happening is that the warm, stagnant water fosters a parasite that kills young salmon. So the salmon are damaged in a couple of big ways. And the Klamath used to be the river that, it could be, again, the river that helps support a West Coast commercial fishing industry for California and Oregon. And I hope to see that again. But right now, the salmon runs on the Klamath are in bad shape, and dam removal should help turn that around.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy and Susan. We have lots of other questions, and I'd be more than happy to share them with you. I just want to acknowledge Kathleen also had a fantastic question about tying flood risk reduction to groundwater recharge. And Alan had a question about comments regarding your state's water resiliency, given the experience we saw last week in Texas. So I would just like to pose a final question to you all. Maybe you can kind of tie in some snippets here and there. You obviously both provided very robust perspectives and gave us all a lot of great insight, background, and information for us to consider. One of the things that we would really like to walk away with is, you have 150 plus attendees here today and a number who will also watch this as a recording. What are some major takeaways you want the audience to walk away with? And what's one action item that we can all start to work on? We'll start with you, Nancy. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Okay. One action item, let's start there. As I mentioned, it'd be great if you dug into your strategic plans for your water districts and your capital improvement plans and took a hard look at them in the spirit of the water resilience portfolio. And then this goes to the first thing you asked for, Megan, which is connections. I feel like we all need more connections. I appreciate your time this morning to hear from us. I welcomed your questions. I think all of us need to continue to build understanding of one another's situations and concerns and priorities.
Thank you, Nancy. And Susan?
Well, a couple of takeaways come to mind, and one is the importance of science and basing our decisions on the best available science, which we strive for in the Delta Plan. But I know that on many tributaries, water managers, of course, do what they can to use best available science. I can't emphasize enough how the Delta Stewardship Council, and actually by law, must use best available science. So if folks have any thoughts about what water management questions or decisions they would like informed by science, I'd like to hear from you. Another takeaway is our ecosystem restoration chapter. The concept of ecosystem-based management and restoring ecosystem function on a very large scale. Jeff Mount at a Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting gave a great presentation and pretty much said what he called gardening projects don't cut it. And so in my mind, the ecosystem is our economy, especially in the Delta. If folks could incorporate more in their thinking the concept and framework of ecosystem-based management, that would be terrific.
Thank you so much, Susan and Nancy. We cannot thank you enough for your time, your engagement, and I can't echo enough how important it is that we have these conversations, that we have these connections, and I hope that this is just the start of more connections and more collaboration. Here are some key takeaways that both of our speakers would like to share with you all. Again, thank you all so much for your time, your engagement. We've had so many great questions, and I'll be more than happy to share some of your questions with our speakers, and hopefully we can get you some answers. And a big thank you to our staff here at MODOC for pulling all of this together. Until next time, hopefully in person. If not, we'll see you again virtually. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.